All right, good morning. I see Drew, Jamie, Trish, and Steve. Good morning, guys. Thanks for joining me. All right, so no housekeeping this morning. Let's get right into the stories. Before I open up the stories themselves, let's just kind of recap what we're looking at. We've heard this ridiculous narrative for months now that there was an insurrection in the Capitol on January 6th. And literally every time I've talked about this since it occurred, I have pointed out that to call it an insurrection was a lie from the word go. So I'm going to get into some stuff this morning about that where this is going to be one of those razor fist moments, you know, Eagles flying, F you, I was right type of thing to the establishment. But before I get to how the government has once again proved me right by admitting to its own foibles and failures, let me cover why I said it was a lie from the beginning. They called it an insurrection on January 6th. An insurrection is a very particular and specific thing. In no way did the demonstration on January 6th meet that guideline. An insurrection is, one, organized, coordinated, planned. Two, prolonged, right? The events of January 6th happened in a handful of hours, about 2.5 hours. The whole incident was only about 2.5 hours. So an insurrection is centrally planned, coordinated, prolonged. It is a complex maneuver of war, right? It is an event where an internal force, right? So a force of the citizenry within a nation conduct the long work of holding ground, acquiring new territory, expanding their physical presence, and taking control and replacing the existing government. Okay? That's what an insurrection is. It is not a bunch of people showing up with signs and a handful of them entering the building. Now, the protesters who are still being held, still today, right? More than 6 months after the fact, without bail, in clear violation of their Eighth Amendment rights, right? No cruel and unusual punishments, and no excessive bail. Okay, you have an Eighth Amendment right that protects you from being burdened with excessive bail. No bail is excessive bail. All right, if you're arrested for a crime, you get a bail hearing. And then whether or not you are granted bail is based on factors like, are you a flight risk? Are you a continued threat, et cetera, et cetera. But you get the hearing, and if you are denied bail, there is reason given. And your defense counsel has an opportunity to argue against the reasons given for the denial of that bail. To not even be afforded the opportunity to be denied bail is absolutely the same as excessive bail. Right? That is no different functionally for these guys than if the judge had decided that each of them had to pay a $1 trillion bail. This is a clear violation of their Eighth Amendment protection against excessive bails. Not only that, we've heard reports that throughout this long incarceration, many of these protesters have been subjected to. Dad, I'll probably get to that in a minute too. Many of these protesters have been subjected to weeks and months on end in solitary confinement, violent physical abuse by the guards that are responsible for them. They've been beaten, they've been hurt, and I mean, this is terrifying that our government is still pursuing this, even given the most recent developments. Now let's talk about what an insurrection does look like. An insurrection looks like months and months and months of active violence, which is actually coordinated and detailed in its coordination with organizational structures, with websites, with social media communication and planning, with cryptological planning and coordination, and the holding of territory, like, for example, the declaration of semi-sovereign or sovereign states, or, as we heard, autonomous zones. What occurred with the Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and, well, basically the Democrat national voting base last year, and was prolonged throughout the period of the year, does rise to meet the definition of an insurrection. And let's not forget that throughout the course of that, many federal officers were killed by these insurrectionists. They set fire to and burned down government buildings and federal buildings, right? And I say government and local government buildings and federal government buildings. There was the incident, I believe it was in Portland, where BLM, Antifa, they surrounded the police station with the police still in it and set the building on fire. This happened at a couple of courthouses, too. That is an insurrection, right? Those individually, those incidences, they rise to the definition of a riot. Taken in total, and given that they were clearly, like, this is not a tinfoil hat conspiracy assumption. This is, the evidence exists, we have seen it. They were clearly organized from one location to another. Not only were they clearly organized from one location to another, but we saw the trend of the tourist protester, people flying in from out of town so that they could get involved in the looting. Now, it's possible that we're talking about an in that case, it's possible that we're talking about an unorganized group of people who happen to know each other and just go to where the looting is, but we know that's not the case. Here's what happens. The mainstream press, the same Democrat-run state media organ that labels a mere protest, a mere demonstration, which is a constitutionally protected activity at the Capitol on January 6th, labels that as a riot, as an insurrection, as the most dangerous thing since the Civil War, as the closest this country has come to the brink since World War II, etc., etc. The same press that makes those labels, they seek out incidences like the death of George Floyd, like the suicide of George Floyd by aggravated assault on police officers. They signal out incidences like that, and they report them broadly and nationally to great effect. Understand, they're not interested. They have no interest at all in how any people are treated by the police. What they're interested in doing is putting a big red flag on a city to target it for the looters. So that essentially, as soon as you see one of those sorts of incidences reported in the media, it's not like it's an unknown. It's not like there's not an obvious expectation that there will be a clear and predictable result. The clear and predictable result every time throughout the last year is that suddenly the tourist rioters show up and they loot and destroy businesses. That is on purpose. That is clear coordination. That is clear coordination by the mainstream media to commit massive crimes with the expressed purpose of causing harm to the United States of America through the use of the protected class of foot soldiers used by the Democrat National Committee. That may sound like a bold claim, but the evidence is irrefutable. The evidence and the recurrence is irrefutable. It's not like we're talking about a single incident. Okay, it was repeated over and over and over again. For example, we look at Black Lives Matter is constantly protesting something pretty much every day in pretty much every city. There's a demonstration, a die-in, a march, a rally, a straightforward looting taking place. So it's not reassuring that a new study finds that just 7% of the time a BLM protest is violent. The Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project looked at 7,750 BLM-linked demonstrations occurring in 2,400 identified locations representing all 50 states and Washington. 7,750 separate demonstrations, riots. Okay, as soon as you're setting a building on fire, it's a riot. It's no longer a demonstration. So let's back up to January 6th for a moment. What happened there? His name was Robert Paulson. Yes, Steve. His name was Robert Paulson. Bob had bitch tits. You go back and you look at the situation on January 6th, and here's what you see. Protesters amassed at the Capitol and were immediately greeted at this public building by police denying access to the public building, to the public lobby, to citizens, to members of the public. Now, generally under the law, you cannot be trespassed from a public building unless you have committed a crime in that building, right? You see this with the First Amendment auditors all the time. Once the cop or the post office investigator or whoever the higher authority arrives and is confronted with the facts of the situation, it's no, it's a public place. That you don't like somebody, Mr. Manager, Mr. Property Manager, that you just don't like somebody isn't sufficient. We're not talking about a private business here. When we're talking about a private business, I could say, you know what, your T-shirt slogan offends me, and I don't want to do business with you in my private business. You can get out of here. But when you're talking about a public building, your presence is absolutely allowed in that public building. Right? Now, in order to be trespassed from a public building, first you have to be warned that you're being issued a trespass. You have to be asked to leave, and then you refuse to leave. And then, upon refusal, now a criminal trespass can be issued. And that goes for public and private. But in the case of a public building, there is the additional requirement that there be a legitimate reason for you to be asked to leave. And that legitimate reason is the commission of a crime. Now, that crime can be public disturbance, disorderly conduct, something like that. But even then, you have to have committed the crime, or at least there has to be adequate evidence to pursue the prosecution of that crime for the trespass to legally be issued. On January 6th, protesters with signs showed up at the Capitol. And before they tried to enter, their entry was barred without anyone having committed a crime. At this point, at that exact moment, the Capitol Police ceased to have any authority to enforce the law. Under the law, at that point, every Capitol Police officer present at the event should be facing dismissal. They should be facing dismissal from the Capitol Police Force, and they should never be allowed to serve as a law enforcement officer ever again. Because what they were engaged in at that point was absolutely the suppression of civil liberties. Anytime a law enforcement officer is engaged in the suppression, repression, destruction, or denial of civil liberties of a U.S. citizen, that must be the absolute end of that person's law enforcement career. At a minimum, right? That should be an offense that requires jail time and a shitload of it. But at a bare minimum, that needs to be the end of a law enforcement officer's career. Once that happened, what you're looking at is a group of citizens engaged in a lawful, constitutionally protected activity, peaceful assembly, free speech, and there was a crap load of cameras there, so you've even got the press in on it. Being assaulted, harassed, and repressed by an organization, the Capitol Police, by an organization of vigilante criminals engaged in the enforcement of non-existent laws. That's what happened. Now, I will go so far as to say that some of the demonstrators made themselves look bad. That's fair. But there's a reason that none of them have been charged with any crimes more serious than trespassing. That's it, trespassing. And as I've already pointed out, there really are no grounds. I mean, the trespassing charges will probably stick on a lot of them, largely because they've, and this is into the weeds a bit, but a lot of them have hired one shitty lawyer who is getting fired left and right because he's really shitty. And so we might see quite a few of the trespassing charges stick on some of these guys, and that's unfortunate. But seriously, trespassing. That said, I don't have an article pulled up. I thought I had an article pulled up for this bit, but that said, when you look at the BLM protesters, there are BLM rioters who have been arrested for arson. And so you understand, arson, big crimes, rape, arson, murder, kidnapping, right? Those are some of the big ones. If a murder is committed, it's handled by the local police. They investigate. That's local police. Right, robbery, the local police will handle that. Kidnapping automatically goes to the federal level, and the FBI comes in. Lesser known, I bet a lot of you didn't know this, arson is the same. Arson automatically triggers federal involvement. That's right. Our governments at the municipal, state, and federal level take arson more serious than murder or rape. And with good reason. Right? Because understand, when we're talking about arson, we're not saying that somebody intentionally burning down an apartment building is a more serious crime than someone actually murdering someone because we value the property over the individual life. That's not it. When you set a building on fire, you're almost invariably committing at least attempted murder, and it's multiple murders, right? Arson essentially assumes attempted murder for the purposes of investigation and elevation to the federal level. So now we're looking at this, and we had a Friday drop, right? Last week we had a Friday drop. And here it is. FBI confirms there was no insurrection on January 6th. The Cambridge Dictionary defines insurrection as, oh, hey, look at this, an organized attempt by a group of people to defeat their government and take control of their country, usually by violence. And Dad points out arson goes federal because of insurance fraud. Yes, and yes, when you're talking about, it's a lot to go into. You're right. Arson goes federal because of insurance fraud. There was a house in our neighborhood, Dad. I don't know if you knew this. There's a house in our neighborhood that a few weeks, I guess it's been almost 2 months ago. A buddy of mine is doing the remodel on it right now, and the remodel is super slow going because he can't use any electricity. Like, there's no power to the house. He can't use any powered tools, right? So, he's having to do everything manually to a point, because what happened was husband and wife apparently had a bit of an argument, and while the husband was out of town, she went through and smashed just everything in the house and then splashed kerosene all over the place, and somebody caught her before she was able to strike the match. But the whole house, buckets and buckets and buckets of kerosene all over the house, to such an extent that the guy that's doing the remodel is having to rip up the floors and replace all the padding under the carpets and under the floating laminates in the kitchens and anywhere that there's basically, he's having to rip out all the floors and there's tests he has to do to make sure that that certain places don't still have kerosene soaked into them. And there's all kind of codes and stuff going on there where he is not allowed to have any kind of electricity in the house per law until he can prove that to some level, to some standard of testing, that the majority has been removed. Like, he can't even have fans in there to hasten the evaporation and evacuation of the fumes. It's pretty intense. I think he's already passed all of that stuff. I think he should have just gotten past it like last week, but that's whoo. That was one of those, I wish I'd have known about it when it was going on, so I could have gone and gotten some video of the investigation. It would have been fantastic. But anyway, so where was I? Okay, so the FBI has basically cleared everybody. 90 to 95% of these are one-off cases, said a former senior law enforcement official with knowledge of the investigation. Then you have 5% maybe of these militia groups that were more closely organized, but there was no grand scheme with Roger Stone and Alex Jones and all of those people to storm the Capitol and take hostages, right? And that's another thing. They said that these guys were trying to take hostages. Bullshit. Okay, one thing that's worth understanding. Okay, here's a little video. You can see something going on here. There were thousands of people, and maybe a couple of hundred Capitol Police. Guys, I'm here to tell you, when you're talking about, okay, if you've got one guy outnumbered 10 to 1 and he's good at what he does, he can handle 10 to 1 odds. Maybe. But when you're talking 10 to 1 on mass scales, that's different math. If you're a 100-man force outnumbered 10 to 1, you're not outnumbered 10 to 1. You're outnumbered the entire army to each of your 1 men. Because it's not as if 10 peel off to deal with you. That's not how that math works. When you're talking about large groups like that, just giving the ratio is a very, very misleading figure. And if you try to plan based on that, you don't understand tactics and planning in any significant way. So, these guys, this was a Friday drop. This is a Friday drop for one reason. They don't want you to know it. That's why I didn't cover this yesterday, Monday morning. I didn't want it to be the first thing we dug into in the week, because I wanted you guys to, get your week started, get to work, get a little coffee in you, get a day under your belt, recover from the weekend haze and all that. So that this wouldn't be the kind of thing that just hits you on the side of the head and falls off like a fried egg in a misflipped pan. They dropped all this on Friday. And understand that part of what this report says, a recent FBI report, right? This was published on Saturday. A recent FBI report has cleared Roger Stone and Alex Jones of any attempt to coordinate an insurrection in the D.C. Capitol on January 6th. Right? But then, here's MSN. Now we're back to the mainstream news. A host for the far-right conspiracy website InfoWars was charged in connection with the January 6th Capitol riot this week, with federal prosecutors alleging he broke the terms of a deal to avoid charges from a January 2020 arrest. And what was he charged with? Texas resident and host of The War Room with Owen Shroyer was charged with 4 misdemeanor counts, including entering a restricted grounds and disorderly conduct, according to court documents published on Thursday. Now, I'm going to need to see some pictures of him in restricted space, because, like this picture they're showing right here, this is on the grounds outside of the Capitol. This is public. Right? Not only is this public, but this is a notoriously common free speech forum in public. Right? Grounds outside of the Capitol. If there's not a First Amendment zone, if there's any such thing as a guaranteed First Amendment zone, that's it. Right? There are certain, okay, so for the purposes of demonstration, and the expression of your free speech under the First Amendment, there are some restrictions that have been codified. Notice I didn't say there are reasonable restrictions. And I'm not arguing that there aren't reasonable restrictions, but I'm not capitulating to the claim that there are reasonable restrictions. But there are restrictions codified in the law. For example, in state parks, state parks are required to have certain areas designated for common use free speech fora in exchange for the ability to restrict demonstration in certain other areas. So like at Yellowstone, there's or at any Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, anywhere where there's like a big overlook where people want to get to the big overlook and look at the large, beautiful natural park scenery and take photographs and the whole vacation with the kids thing. In many cases, those locations are marked as restricting your right to demonstrate in those locations, because nobody wants to drive to Yellowstone, get up on the perch, set up their camera to pop a cup of coffee, getting relaxed, right? Getting relaxed. And then all of a sudden you got some guy behind you shouting about how the earth is flat. You know what? I don't even care if you agree with the guy. Sometimes I don't want to hear it. And that's kind of the argument for those restrictions. Steve, I want to agree that there should be no restrictions, and I do for the most part. That's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down. I am 99.9% a free speech absolutist. I am more of an absolutist on free press than on free speech. Right? I'm more an absolutist on free press than on free assembly. And I'm absolutely more absolutist on the right to redress the government for grievances, to petition the government for redress of grievances. I'm absolutely more absolutist on that right than any of the others, except for the Second Amendment. Right? Except for the right to keep and bear arms and defend one's life. I take the right to petition the government for redress of grievances very seriously. So, yeah, Danny, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now because I need to wrap this show up. And oh yeah, Steve, the Fourth Amendment. I want to be an absolutist on the Fourth Amendment. I want to be an absolutist on the Fourth Amendment, but I just can't bring myself there quite. So, but yes, the fact is that they dropped all this on Friday, and they dropped the Owen Shroyer thing. Owen Shroyer's not going to be charged. Or rather, he's not going to be convicted. He's not going to actually serve any time over any of this. The whole reason that Owen Shroyer was charged was so that there would be something that these shitheads could flood the algorithm with to suppress search results so that people aren't stumbling across the few articles that actually say the FBI says there was no insurrection. That's why they dropped it on a Friday. That's why they flooded the internet with with bullshit charges on Owen Shroyer. And because they don't want to admit that Alex Jones did nothing wrong, or that Roger Stone did nothing wrong. I had some stuff pulled up I was going to talk about how terrifyingly often Alex Jones is right about things, but we'll come back and do that again another time. Yo, that's all I've got for you this morning. Thanks for watching. I love you. Y'all be safe out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.